Thank you very much for giving us the time and in the context of these Medor talks in which so many diverse ideas and visions are shared. Your point of view and your wisdom is an opportunity for all the people listening to these interviews. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, on the moment we are living. All this uncertainty requires people with a long experience, with long vision. So could you tell us how you see the world and how you see the challenges we are living today?
Let me start by telling you that I was one of the main proponents of Medor from the very beginning. I know very well Marco Minniti. We were together when I was European Commissioner. He was Minister of Interior, and we worked very closely in order to address all these challenging issues of that time, mostly migration and security. So the idea was how to create a platform of dialogue. He said, diverse people. This is what makes this forum very interesting. As I said this morning, we're not here just to recite our poem as it is instructed to us by our governments. We have acquired a great experience. You said before, a bit of wisdom. Yes, it comes with the time, but also in a spirit of responsibility. Because our generation is confronted today with huge challenges, and the question is, what will be our legacy for the next generations? It is not what we had known and we had experienced worldwide in politics 20 years ago. Things have changed. And my big concern, coming to the core of your question, is the rise of populism everywhere that lead the world to the wrong direction. It has happened before. That's what I told you just a minute ago. It reminds me of the situation in Europe and the world, the Republic of Weimar before the Second World War. People are expressing a sort of anti-political sentiments. This is detrimental to democracy. And this is now the responsibility of the leadership. How to convince people that their ideas, their vision, and their work is to serve their own interests. You see where we're standing today. What's the state of play in the world? Could you ever imagine 10 years ago that a war would be waged at the heart of Europe? That there would be such a backtracking in Middle East? Things were moving quite well. The Abraham Accords were adopted and endorsed by everybody in the region. And where do we stand now? Would you ever imagine that the Pacific would become one more crisis center or Northern Pole? Everywhere. So the world is crossing turbulent times. And now, let's come to the most important point. What can we do? Because it is interesting to describe the situation, but what is the outcome of all these issues we discussed today? And I can tell you, the panel was very, very good. All these panelists, they contributed with their idea, their experience. But at the end, it is important to know what is the next step for the world. Because here, we're not going to decide this if we represent governments, but we can provide with food of consideration the governments. But do the governments listen to us? Do the governments really listen to the real needs of the people? We live in the era of globality. This is what I said this morning. Globalization is done. Thanks to this revolution in technologies, in transport, in telecommunication, in everything, globality has been imposed. And the people would expect from their leaders to pave the way in order to usher in a new era. But the door is closed. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I'm afraid that if we continue like this, there will be huge social, political problems. The antagonism between the global stakeholders will reach its climax, and the next step will be to see the closing of this era, let's hope it will not be done in a painful way as it has happened many times in the past. I always say that what I think Marx said, that history repeats itself, is not correct. Men repeat history because very simply they don't read it and they don't draw lessons from what has happened in the past. So I believe this is the moment for a deep consideration of our responsibilities as a generation and to close the gap between the younger generations that they do not trust politics anymore. That's why we have a wave of anti-political sentiments across Europe. It's not anti-governmental in some belief, they're anti-political. And this opens the door for the populists to gain ground.
You have experienced international organizations in a very special way. You served in different very high positions in your country, in Greece, but you have been also a commissioner dealing with very delicate matters in Brussels, in the European Union. And as foreign minister, you have also dealt with United Nations. Today, one of these features of the time we're living is the crisis of international organizations. And this is having an impact on international matters. How worried you are about this crisis, about situations like the Brexit, like the rise of the extreme right and extreme left in the European Parliament, or the United Nations losing support from some of its main members, like the United States?
The global order, as it was somehow imposed after the Second World War and at the second stage after the Cold War, is not there anymore. And this is very, very worrying. Multilateralism, which was really a great achievement in international relations, is in decline. Mm-hmm. And this is also an issue to give us a lot of concern. Mm-hmm. Take an example. United Nations, which after the Second World War was the #1 organization in the world, and it was reflecting a philosophy that came out from very dramatic experiences for the last 50 years before it was created. Today, nobody pays attention to what the United Nations will say. Even the members of the Security Council, they do not agree with what they decide. And at the level of the General Assembly, I have attended it many times, next week I will be there too, a lot of rhetorics with nice words, but nothing in practical terms. I'll give you an example. When I met the former Secretary General of the United Nations in Brussels once, I suggested to convene an extraordinary General Assembly to address migration. I said, it's not a problem of Europe, it's a problem of the world. What I said today, right now, more than 400 million people around the world are on the move. So it's a global responsibility how to address it. He said, it's a good idea. He did it. We all went there, all European leaders and leaders from other parts of the world were there. I was there, of course, taking notes. I came out with a bit of optimism because what they said, it was exactly what we should do in order to address this phenomenon of our times. Nothing was done. They all went back home, and then every country was addressing the issue on its own. But when you address this issue on your own, then you are subjected to the pressure of domestic dynamics and politics, and nothing can be done. That's why we're at a stalemate today. And regarding the European Union as an institution, we shouldn't forget that the European Union was created on the ashes that the 2 world wars had left behind. And visionary and responsible leaders of that time, one day, they gathered around the table and said, okay, let's create a larger space of stability, peace, cooperation, friendship, and growth. And they managed to do it. And for more than 50 years, European Union was doing well. I was among the commissioners who lived in a totally different environment in Brussels. But things have changed during the last 7, 8 years. Dramatic changes. And the European dream and the European project are at stake because the citizens have started not believing in Europe. If I could say something today addressing the younger generation who are attending, who are watching us now, I would say, don't abandon the European dream. Because if the moment comes for you to rediscover it and revive it, it will be too late. The legacy of the generations of the time was very clear. Let's change the world. And they did it. And then we had the end of the Cold War. If I could tell you one day, my last discussion with Gorbachev, he had visited me twice when I was mayor of Athens, and later I saw him again. I was also there as diplomat when the Charter of Paris was signed in the year 1992. Maybe you remember that. Mm-hmm. At that time, the leaders were speaking, were talking, and agreeing on creating a new Europe from Vancouver to Vladivostok. Maybe you remember this phase. Mm-hmm. And Will came and said, well, the world is changing. It never happened. And now you see what is happening in Europe. Gorbachev had a dream to put, at that time, the Soviet Union, Russia, in the European Union. Very bold vision. It never happened. And you see now, we are at the gate of a conflict between the Western world and Russia. Things have changed, so I believe that the world has entered a zone of political and historical turbulences. That's why I come back to what we said before. We need visionary, bold leadership that will not count on the so-called political cost. But who are the ones that will define this development? The citizens. The citizens have a great power in their hand to start thinking of how they can bring on the surface the values and the principles expressed by politicians. Because European global democracy will always need politicians. But who are they? If the populists prevail, then the world will be dragged in big, big troubles.
You mentioned before in an earlier discussion something very interesting. You explained the difference between patriotism as loving your country and nationalism, yeah, which is hating other countries.
If I'm allowed, yes, this is the definition I gave. There's a difference between patriotism and the nationalism. In patriotism, you love your country. In nationalism, you have to hate the country of the other. And what's happening here? Some politicians, so-called leaders, they indoctrinate citizens how to hate the others. So they bring back old, bad memories of history. Because we all have gone through difficult moments in the past. But if you turn your back to the future, you stumble.
And I wanted to ask you about a particular aspect in this phenomenon, because in some countries, I am shocked to see that quite a big support to these extreme positions, be right or left, are from young people who didn't have, who don't have a memory of those ashes you mentioned before, of the First and the Second World War. When you think of these young people with all these populists trying to attract their attention, what do you think we should tell them? What is the message of hope we can send to these youth?
What is the practice of populists? They say nice things. They whisper in the ears of the young people nice things, knowing that they will never accomplish it. So, coming back to the core of your question. As I said before, we are crossing a very difficult period. Anti-political feelings are fostered around them because young people do not see a better future. So they have to hold accountable the system. The system is expressed by political parties and politicians. The others come and say, they are the reason that you have failed and you do not have a future on everything. So they start developing an anti-systemic attitude. And this leads exactly to what I said before. I'll give you an example. Recently, there were polls. It was a survey in Greece. I even wrote an article about it because I was taken by surprise, to be frank with you. 1 out of 4 of young Greeks, they opt for a dictatorship. Without knowing what a dictatorship really means. They don't know. 1 out of 4, 25%. It's a huge percentage. And we in Greece, we had experienced dictatorship in the past, as in Spain, for instance, or in other parts of Europe. So the younger generation has forgotten because some have inspired them to forget. I have my own theory. Every 4 generations, the world is crossing dramatic moments. The first generation has lived the tragic events of a war, and they decided to create a new world of peace, friendship, cooperation, and stability. Okay. The second generation, after 20 years, they walk on the same path with the previous one because they are connected. The third generation has a fantastic time because of the achievements of the previous generation everywhere, together with all these big achievements in new technologies, in a better life. And the fourth generation, they demand more. They have the experience of having lived a good time with their parents, and now they say, who is going to shape our future? They have forgotten. That's why I said at the beginning of our conversation, it is very important for young people, first, to read history. The second, to start building their own dreams. And third, to build bridges with the previous generation. Because this anti-systemic is interpreted also in a sort of cancelling of what the previous generation had done. It's a bit philosophical, but not far away from the reality. Where do we stand now?
Well, thank you very much. We could spend hours talking and...
Yes, but we shouldn't finish with pessimistic thoughts. The history has told us that everything has to do with cycles. We live the end of this cycle. Let's hope that the opening of the new one will not be done in a dramatic way. This is our responsibility, but also of the younger generations to stop the bad things from happening. That's why I said before, we have to be optimistic. Life will not stop here, but we have to cope in a very responsible way with the problems of today.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure of mine.